Hello and welcome to VarmBlog. Today we are talking about a way to think of politics in a different binary instead of left versus right. We're going to be thinking about up versus down. My guest today is Travis Misurell, founder of Fink, the Future is Now Coalition. Here at VarmBlog, we often discuss how party gatekeepers and capital-intensive systems shrink our choices before we ever get to a ballot. And Travis Misurell is tackling this through a materialist infrastructure lens by building the Digital Politics Hub, which will maybe refer to as DP Hub for short from here on out. And this is not just a tech platform, it's a way to bypass the two-party sorting mechanisms. This system uses a unique use of civic tags where candidates define themselves in their own words, focusing on advocacy and identity rather than party platforms and labels, and where citizens provide open-ended data on their actual priorities. We'll be discussing why previous civic tech projects failed. Many have failed. And the problem of the parties as a referee, as a model of political utility, and maybe how we can start to build a more citizen-owned democracy in the near future. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
I am well. So you often pitch these concerns as people should stop asking just about left or right as their kind of nebulous directional metaphors, and start asking about up or down, which is a different directional metaphor. But I would like you to clarify what you mean by up or down here.
Yeah, sure. So upserving candidates are the ones, they serve their big donors, they serve special interests, they serve those with more power than them. So basically, they turn to those with higher power to raise them up in power, whereas the downserving candidates are the grassroots candidates, and they want to serve you, the voter, and they gain power by gaining massive voter support, volunteer support, grassroots donations. And so it's a different framing. Most of the people already in Congress are the upserving ones, and they're not actually representing you as a common voter. They're serving those that are giving them the most power boost, which is the big donors and party gatekeepers.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I think that's pretty crucial to understanding why, for example, political platforms and whatnot don't actually lead to anything like predictors of voting records or administrative functions or anything like that, because that's not for the people that these upserving politicians are focusing on, right? How does focusing on this create a way for a voter to cut through what is an increasing environment of just flat out political noise? I mean, it's one thing when you have paid ads and all this, and people would talk about, campaign finance reform, but that's not even relevant now to social media. It's hard to even imagine how it would apply to Twitter or X or whatever. So how does this help get around that, and what should voters be looking for?
Yeah, so what they should be looking for and how to identify downserving candidates, like the bottom line is, are they legitimate? Are they going to actually fulfill their promises? Are they even going to try to fulfill their promises? So we want to help people identify those markers. So some of it is like who's funding their campaign. Most people don't know this, but it is publicly available to know who's funding campaigns. What kind of super PACs are behind them, things like that. Because those are direct conflicts of interest. They're not going to fix healthcare if millions of dollars from healthcare industry is giving them money. They are purposely being basically legally bribed not to fulfill their promises. So that's the number one, is just getting into this mindset that it almost wouldn't matter left versus right. It's that they all have these conflicts of interest. They're all gonna promise what they can to get your vote, but then they're not gonna do it once they're elected, and then the media is not gonna really hold them accountable anymore. So that's kind of the world we live in today. And really to tie it into what we're doing, we want to build a level playing field that gives you all your choices right up front. These are all your options. It's not about the gatekeepers deciding who your choices are. We want every candidate to be an option, at least in the beginning, and then let the citizens narrow down the choices, not the establishment.
You mentioned that the system is rigged, not broken, and I think that sentiment. You're not going to get any argument from me on that. But I do want to ask you, in what race specifically is it rigged, and maybe we can go from there.
I mean, it's just the system itself is rigged, so it's essentially every race, pretty much. So you could point to anything. It's basically like we're doing a lot of focus with Nevada candidates right now, and we've been speaking to them there, and it's the same story everywhere. That these grassroots candidates, they get no visibility. The media will not talk to them. The party leaders will not acknowledge that they're even in the race. Before the ballot, before you even decide who's on the ballot, the candidates, the party gatekeepers know who they want to win, and they're going to stack the favor in that person's favor. So, as we say, there's Democrat gatekeepers or Republican gatekeepers. Yeah, there's a difference between their general ideology, but ultimately both sides, if they don't approve of you as a candidate, they're going to do everything they can in their power to make sure you can't win by people not even knowing you exist. So I'd say it's a systemic issue in the structure of how we're presented our choices.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, and it also explains certain weirdnesses of American politics. For example, when you do see some insurgent candidates, be they grassroots or not, they'll often appeal to other states' population to get money because they can't get visibility without that, particularly if they're overcoming an incumbent advantage and incumbent funding. And that's strange because you're asking people who won't represent you and who you don't have any like fiduciary responsibility to or delegate responsibility to. You don't represent them at all, to promote you. And that also has a distorting effect on local politics, even for insurgent candidates, because they are thus beholden, if not to big corporations and super PACs, they're at least beholden to interest beyond the interest of their own representative pool. And I think it's important to understand that. I want to talk about how this is hidden, though, from the average person, because people think, they have a say in primaries, they have a say in caucuses, they can get the signatures to get a candidate on the ballot. Although the costs for that are often, even for local races, increasingly astronomical. But a lot of people, feel that the system is rigged. They know at some level what you're talking about is true, but they don't understand how they're shut out of it early on. So can we talk about the specifics? Like what are you seeing in Nevada?
Yeah. So the main thing is like, where the law, in terms of the way the legal structure is concerned and like the logistical process of voting, you have all choices. You could even choose third party, independent, everyone, but we're all manipulated to have a false sense of limiting our choices. So there's a few different ways that happens. So one is just purely the visibility of these candidates. You'll have no idea. Like there's just one race, the CD2, Congressional District 2 of Nevada, that there's like 20 something people running in that race right now, and yet the media is only covering like two or a couple, like, and then no one out. They're not even saying, oh, there's a huge pack of people in here. No, they're just like two main people. Everyone else don't even look at it. So it's already so hard. I hear this all the time when I talk to citizens, that people don't know how to find where their choices are. There's no like smooth way to just say, this is my zip code, here are all your choices, and then here's how to, learn more about each choice. There's various sites with various capabilities. Definitely more federal levels easier. State level is semi-easy, and then it gets super hard once you get local. So visibility is definitely number one. That just because it ties to the three evils of that's preventing democracy is the party gatekeepers, the mainstream media, and then the big donors. And so, you know, immediately before the primary is even discussed, the big donors are there. So the establishment choices are going to have all the funding they need. They're already plugged into the same networks, you know, status quo, quid pro quo, all that stuff. As soon as you say that I'll do whatever the party tells me to do, I don't give a shit about my voters. All I care about is what you guys tell me to do. You get your checks. There you go. You got all the big donors that they want you to have. You have money. You're not going to have to worry too much about money. Yeah, there's still plenty of fundraising they still have to do beyond that, but they have a huge starting point. Then 2 is just the party gatekeepers, that as soon as they decide that you are not who they want, they're gonna keep stacking anything against you. Again, that visibility and networks and keep you away from the networks of voters, networks of donors, all that stuff. And then the 3rd is the media, kind of tied in. They're all kind of, you know, interconnected in a lot of ways, because the party gatekeepers don't want you, because the big donors are not going to fund you. The media is going to be like, all right, well, you have no shot. I'm not going to even bother giving you any voice. So I'm not even going to interview you ever. So that ultimately, so it's really those things that prevent you from having to see all your choices. And then if 1 or 2 of them do end up being known, even to a small extent, they're like, oh, this fringe crazy candidate thinks they're going to win. Ha ha ha. Like, you know, they present it in a way that if you vote for that person, you're wasting your vote. And that's part of the manipulation as well.
Yeah, that's, I mean, to me, that's been obvious since Ross Perot. But I do think it's interesting. Like, there are attempts to get around this, and what I know more about is like 403 C and D political advocacy groups that really can't do much about this stuff because they're not super PACs, and their political spending is often limited to, you know, $5,000-$10,000, which sounds like a lot until you ever do anything in politics. But you also noted that there's been other attempts to get around this. You have talked about 15 different tech platforms that have tried and failed to intervene in American democracy. Why did they fail?
Yeah, so the main thing is, like, each organization, from movements to civic tech, like, they're trying one side of influence. And so part of what's unique about Fink is, like, we're actually looking at a lot of different angles to move the needle, that if we interconnect certain pieces, like basically building a citizen-owned ecosystem, that's essentially what we're trying to do. And so we're trying to build healthier alternatives to what already exists. But for the direct answer to your question, so the civic tech orgs that have tried this, their problem is, like, they're building a tool to make voting easier. And so they want to build a tool, and then, I mean, part of their mistake is they build a tool and they think that people are just going to magically flock in. No marketing, no outreach, just people just magically show up. Some, you know, they'll try a little bit of marketing, but they usually underestimate how much marketing is needed. But ultimately, like, the problem is, like, they're not promising systemic change. They're just saying, oh, here's an easier way to vote, that you'll be able to see more information about your candidates, so it'll be quicker to decide who you want to vote for. Now, what we're doing is we're not saying we're not even a tech company. We're people first. This is a movement first. We're building supporting technology as we go, as we talk to candidates, citizens, and movements. We build technology that will reinforce what they need and help them. But we're not tech first. And most of our resources actually go to outreach and interconnecting, building partnerships and citizen engagement way more than we do on the tech side of it. And the core of that is, like, we're talking about fundamentally upgrading democracy, that we want to modernize democracy. It's one of the few things that have not caught up with the digital age. You know, you can order a cheeseburger, you get a ratings of the cheeseburger, you can get a ratings of the Uber driver that's going to deliver that cheeseburger to you, but you basically can't look at your choices on a menu or ratings on anything for a candidate. Like, it's ridiculous. Everything else in this world is digitized except for politics. So we're building in digital infrastructure that will make it easier for an average citizen to see all your choices and then zoom in as deeply as you want to see, which is the best match for you. And so that framing is something that those other tech companies did not do. We're a tech company, here's a tool, and it's going to make things a little easier. And we're like, no, we're here to completely flip the system upside down, bring accountability and transparency into the system, and empower citizens to have all their choices right up front.
So, you talk about the limitations of individual tools, and it does seem like a problem of most complex social systems. You intervene with a tool, you're going to address one part of a complex social system, right? You talk about the need, and you describe part of Fink's mission as building a new kind of infrastructure. Can you go into the specifics of Fink's infrastructure?
Yeah, sure. So it's a two-phase approach. Right now, it's with our digital politics hub, the DP hub. Already, it's a matchmaker to match citizens with their candidates. It's a way for citizens to say what their priorities are, and then matchmake to candidates that will fulfill those priorities. It's still in the earlier stages, but that's mainly what it is right now. But overall, the phase 2 is what we call digital democracy. It takes it to a deeper level and more stakeholders involved. The main groups that we see as part of an ecosystem is it's a civic tech orgs, but then it's also independent media and independent journalists. It's movements and other kinds of political organizations, and then it's the candidates as well as parties, alternative parties, candidate coalitions. So the idea is like we want to build infrastructure that plugs each piece into a greater system. So we literally we'll have a whole system built out just for independent media to give them a voice, interconnect them to get more visibility with citizens. Same with candidates, and that candidate part is what we already started building, is giving candidates visibility, and then even movements. And movements would be on here. Movements would be able to do their own scoring system on candidates, and you can see it right through our system. They'll be able to be networks of trust. Like there's just a lot of different features for each perspective that's involved in politics, and we want to build an integrated infrastructure that empowers each one of these, and none of it is based on like, oh, well, you don't believe my political belief. It's like everyone across any political belief can be plugged into this. As long as they want to play a fair game and want real representation for citizens, they could plug in, and there's a way to empower anyone from media to citizens. So there's a lot of layers to it, but it's just building an interconnected system that helps streamline the matchmaking ability between all these different stakeholders, and communicating between people, giving choices up front, transparency, all that good stuff.
One of the ways you tend to frame this, and what I've read in your materials, is that you focus on civic tags, at least for the politician end of this. What are these civic tags, and how can they give you more information than, say, just the DRR and the platforms associated with that behind the name?
Yeah, great question. So that's one of the key ways to differentiate individual candidates. One of the main things that Fink one of our goals is to really move past the ultra partisanship that, like, some people truly believe that all Democrats are great or all Republicans are great. It's like, no, there's so much more complexity to the world than that. So the way these tags work, there's 3 categories of tags. There's like who I am as a person, like a parent, a veteran as a candidate. The second one is their political lens, and that's one of the most important ones. So they could say, I'm filed as a Republican, but I identify as a libertarian. Or I file as Democrat, but I identify as a Marxist, a socialist, a progressive. Like, so there's already a multiple choice that they could choose, but they could also create their own tags. They can define their own tags, so there's not a miscommunication. So that's the best one, is the political lens tag. And then the third one is advocacy tags. So those are like just a keyword to say, what do you stand for? Free energy, or clean energy, education first, what pretty much anything they could think of. And so the idea is like, kind of using in this modern world, people like hashtags and keywords. So these civic tags is a way of like, instead of a candidate having like a 10-page essay on what their policy are, and then you don't know what it actually means when push comes to shove, now you just have like that one keyword. It's like one or two keywords, and then they could define it. But if they define it, maybe a sentence, not more than that. So forces them to be concise and to the point. So the tagging allows the candidate to differentiate themselves, but then also on the citizen side, now, as this starts really rolling out and taking shape, citizens can put power to some of these tags. If like millions of people love the clean energy tag, that's going to tell these candidates that clean energy is a very popular way to move forward. So it's kind of a more fluid way for citizens to tell candidates what they want on a very large scale.
Another thing that makes the DP Hub kind of unique is using surveys and open-ended questions as opposed to polling, which for people who don't know or have never taken a poll, most polling choices are pre-selected for you, and thus are given to all kinds of both framing and selection biases. Hence why certain poll results seem to contradict each other. How do you sort these open-ended responses, though? Because that has been that's probably a large reason why pollsters didn't use them, is the technology of like cataloging and indexing every possible open-ended answer, particularly before computers, but even with computers until relatively recently, was an onerous task. I mean, how are you sorting those results, and what do you hope to get by that sorting?
Yeah, so the main reason that it's now possible is really about AI. I can't deny that like now AI, you could have 10,000 open-ended answers that citizens have submitted, and AI can aggregate it in a couple minutes. So that is the game changer that has happened now. Pollsters, so it's new even for pollsters, and then also pollsters, a lot of them want to shape things in certain ways. So we want this like completely open-ended system. Like right now, when you first add your name to our on our hub, we ask just 3 main questions, like what's the biggest problem your community is facing right now? If your representative could fix one thing, what would it be? And what would good leaders do differently than what you see right now? So that's like a good starting point. So, and the idea is like, people will answer it differently based on their location, what state, what local level. So we can aggregate all this data of like, okay, in this state, this is the main concerns that people mention. And in this district specifically, they're talking about the playground that's about to get torn down, or this mall that they're upset about. So it really like completely, like, first of all, it's like, we're not pointing anything up at first. So it's like, what comes to an average person's mind if you're going to say, what is the number one thing you're worried about? So rather than loading the question to get an answer, completely open-ended, see where it goes into. But then, so using the AI to aggregate the data, show that, this many people have a concern like this, find different patterns. A lot of the issue might be trust. They talk about different issues that they care about, but the bottom line is trust, or, AI can find different points to pull out, like as it sees more patterns. Once we get these answers plugged in from like thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, then there's more and more ways that we can see the common denominators of what people are worried about, what keeps them up at night, what is at their front of minds. So, AI could kind of be endless, and, we'll probably be surprised by some of the data the more once we get a higher level of responses. But like a lot of the candidates we're talking about and not talking to in Nevada are really excited about that kind of data. I think you kind of touched on it, that pollsters are getting less and less accurate right now. They can't even really predict elections as much anymore in the last few years. And a lot of that is just people are different now. I mean, there's more people that identify as independent than in the two parties right now, and that's pretty much never happened in modern history. And so that messes up a lot of their predicted data points. So this allows a lot more fluidity to pull out concern. Like, the more America gives their ideas, their thoughts, their fears, their feedback, the more we can pull unpredictable data from it.
One thing that I think is interesting about this that maybe isn't obvious is how local it is. One of the problems with the massive amounts of money you need even to do local politics, it ends up making all campaigning national, like I mentioned priorly. But it also means that also individuals aren't following, don't know what's going on in local politics. In Utah, where I'm from, we tend to have ballots sent to us, and they're very extensive. And I keep up with politics. I'm a political podcaster. It's something that I do. And even particularly when it comes to voting for judges, I'm always like, I don't even know where I would find this information. They gave me one little book guide, and I read it, and I guess I'm supposed to trust what the Utah lawyers say. What some in my state, some elections are partisan, some elections are not, and the sorting's not obvious. Although even the nonpartisan elections are really kind of partisan because of the funding routes that you talked about. What I find interesting about this open-ended strategy, it is a way to get a feel for specific issues in very local places that often aren't even covered by local news anymore for a variety of reasons, and also are diffused on things like social media. I talk about this on my show. People ask me why I don't talk more about specific Utah labor politics stuff I do in my daily life here. And I don't, because my audience is too diffused. I have thousands of listeners, but they are spread out over actually multiple countries. So when I try to cover something specific to Salt Lake, or the greater Salt Lake area where I live, there's really no market for it. And it's interesting that the survey strategy would create a way for people to engage with that again, because they would not be as dependent on these big money sources. I mean, and that's behind all the problems when you talk about the media. One of the problems with the media is local media is dying and runs less and less of its own news because it doesn't have the money to support itself, and it doesn't have a local base. It's competing with diffuse shows like mine, actually, and not succeeding. But also that means that no one's covering those things in the same way anymore. This kind of brings me to the Nevada pilot. We mentioned it indirectly already. You mentioned the Nevada situation where you guys are running the proof of concept. Why did you choose Nevada? It's a neighboring state. It was just there a week ago, but Nevada's kind of an interestingly strange state in a lot of ways. So why was Nevada your point for the pilot?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the first one that initiated it was kind of, that's where the opportunity happened, that we gained a strong partnership in Nevada. But then, before we really decided to make it a pilot, we looked at it, and it is a test place for a lot of primaries, for kind of experimenting on different formats. There's something with that state that they're just used to piloting new ways of election reforms and stuff. And then also it has a unique thing where a lot of the national demographics are mirrored in Nevada. So the percentage of independent right now in the federal level kind of matches the same percentages that are in Nevada specifically. So it tends to be one of those states that a lot of people pay attention to early on before the major elections to kind of see how it pans out. So that was the the rationale after just the opportunity to connect, and then seeing that as like, okay, yeah, it actually looks like a perfect opportunity to plug in with them. I mean, we'd be open, like, I mean, any candidate nationwide can create their profiles on our system and whatnot. It's just we're specifically we're putting extra attention to Nevada. But if there's another state that just really starts blooming and we see a big opportunity, we kind of go with the flow of wherever the opportunities are knocking. But you know, right now it's the big ones, Nevada.
Yeah, I find Nevada interesting for something like this because it is weirdly nonpartisan and also hyperpartisan simultaneously. Like, blue areas in Nevada are extremely blue. There's more union representation in Nevada than people realize because of the casinos, oddly. You know, there's and yet also, like, the red areas of Nevada are almost without government. So it's an interesting state in that regard because they all exist in the same state, in the same ecosystem. I find it interesting, you know, how this would fare in a very obviously partisan state like California or Texas, where the one party almost has a management over the state in such a way that really favors it. How do you think this would go in a state like that?
Actually, really, I would think it would go maybe even better. Because, like, I mean, the biggest distraction and problem we have is, like, people still go into their lesser two evils. Like, you know, so a lot of what we market is like, you know, you are not being represented, trust in government all-time low, the money in politics all-time high, this and that. We're trying to prove to people that no matter that even your own party has a boatload of conflicts of interest, and that ultimately you're kind of choosing lesser two evils. And most people are on board with that, except for like the diehard, like, people like super committed to their party, which is, it's still a huge population. But so they're the ones, like, you know, if I talk to Democrats, I'm like, oh, but Trump this, but Trump that. It's like, okay, but like the system is breaking down. Both parties are not representing. And like, so they just go immediately to the worst evil. Well, that side's even worse. Like, okay, just because something's worse does not mean your side's great, you know, like, so, you know, so in a situation where it's actually heavily one side, that distraction is a little less dire to them. And so, like, going to California, it'd be about getting a better Democrat in office. Okay, you have a lot of you know, there's certain districts where there's 2 senators in the general election, both Democrat, but like there's still a huge establishment ownership of California, and a lot of people in that state are unhappy with the specific choices of like, they want, you know, most of them do want the Democrat, but they don't like the Democrat that's chosen. So what we would be doing, because like a lot of what we want to do is bring the problem to the primary. The primaries is where you really have your choices. You know, by the general election, it's basically the lesser two evils by that point. So we would, you know, something like California, we would be pushing of like how to help people identify the better candidate even within the same party, and not to treat everyone in the same party the same way. Yeah, so I think it would go pretty well in a lot of different circumstances. I mean, that's part of the uniqueness, is like how we're politically agnostic. Anything from better candidates within 2 parties to third party, independent. We don't care which way America goes. We want to build infrastructure that allows any of it to be possible.
So this is beyond pushing just like a third party or multiple party options, which have also historically in the United States not gone well. You know, the only time that I could think of third parties being a serious contender for the presidency is in the early 20th century. I think 1918 would be where you had 2 third-party candidates who could hold more than 10% of the vote. But it's been that long, and I think the next closest one is Ross Perot in 92. But I think it's also important, though, that like you point out that these parties also contain all kinds of people within them. And both parties actually. Like there's a huge difference between Rand Paul and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Marco Rubio, just to name some Republicans, are AOC, Gavin Newsom, weirdly, I'm having trouble with Democrats today, but Cory Booker, those are, there's also a pretty large gap there, and there's insurgent movements in all of these parties. In fact, right now we see a lot of it. A lot of incumbent Democrats, even though Democrats are doing well in early voting debates right now, their funding's not doing well, and they are often, incumbents are often getting unseated within the party. So I find it interesting because it would give people a better way to understand that. There's nothing that does that nationally. There are some things that do it for specific interests in specific areas, like the DSA, for example. It hits above its 100K membership level, but it's really only super influential in some specific progressive cities. And it has integrated representation in New York and the Democratic Party, but that's about it, right? Like the other insurgent groupings tend to have money, and I remember, I'm old enough to remember Tea Party Mach 1 in 2007, and how by 2011 the original founders were complaining that they were astroturfed by money, and it changed the message that they were sending. And I find it interesting to think about, well, what if they didn't have to get astroturfed by money? What would the Tea Party look like? Now, I'm not a partisan of the Tea Party, I didn't like them, but it would have been interesting to know what that would have stayed as if it had stayed organic. It might have still been crazy, but right now I don't know what that is. And so I find a way around that very interesting. I want to ask you though, specifically, your end goal is not the digital politics hub, it is the digital democracy. What specifically is that? That's a broad name.
Yeah, and it's supposed to. It's more of like, that might not even be the final name of it. It's more of like digital democracy. It's actually getting a popular term these days, but people see it as a different thing. What we are, it's almost like a civic internet is what we are envisioning it. So like right now, the DP hub we're building is a tool. The digital democracy is going to be the toolbox. So right now we're building some tools as the example to get it started, putting it in the toolbox when the time comes, but we're also not going to be the only one putting tools in the toolbox. So there's other organizations that we're already friends with, some that we just hypothetically can see connecting with in the future. But we envision digital democracy being the citizen-owned space that ultimately America is going to own this technology. They're going to be like not Fink. We're actually going to build a structure where every American can opt into one equal ownership stake of the technology. But then all like different reforms, civic technologies, parties can all use this infrastructure, this shared stage, shared infrastructure, and build it beyond what Fink has. So like we're kind of like the vision of it, and we're going to forever kind of do the marketing and buy-in and get more citizens involved. But eventually we want digital democracy to take root away from Fink controlling it at all. We want it to eventually be completely citizen-owned. And so it's just going to keep building out. Like if and when we get, if we start doing online voting, like legally online voting, that would be part of digital democracy. But also being the infrastructure for independent media, being the one system for the candidates. As we build out what our profiles look like with accountability, we want to plug in like for example, OpenSecrets.org does a lot of the data around who's funding what campaigns. So we want to plug that data into digital democracy to come up with a democracy score for every candidate. That'd be one of the data points. So other organizations are tracking how much money people are making in the stock market from candidates, and like watching for the windfalls and the insider trading stuff. That data would be plugged in. So it's almost like aggregating the different data that organizations are pulling together, aggregating different technologies that exist into one system. So again, it's really like this toolbox analogy of like, there's all these tools that already exist, but most people have no idea they exist. We would be the ones marketing the toolbox, but then once you open the toolbox, all the tools in there are from all different places in the country, of all different organizations that have built different things. So that's ultimately what digital democracy is. It's like once it goes beyond Fink building it ourselves, and it's like all these different orgs and citizens and media building it together, is when that is going to flip to, and that's our phase 2, digital democracy.
Okay. So, given the concerns about funding in any political structure, how is this funded now, and what's the funding goals for the future? Like, you mentioned citizen owned. What does that mean in specific? Those kinds of questions are probably pretty pertinent.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, doing the citizen owned first. So it's any citizen will be able to opt in. No money involved. Like, yes, it'll encourage a donation, but it wouldn't be required. But they're also not going to be able to take money out either. The goal is like essentially every American gets 1 share of the system. So you either opt in, you have 1 share, or you didn't opt in, you get no shares. You can't buy a second one, you can't sell it. All that stuff would be importantly structured out. Really, the goal is just like making sure that the American people have legal ownership over digital democracy, and so there'll be like an election every few years of who's running the technology. It's not going to be Fink, it's going to be somebody else, and like we're going to vote for them. Vote for, maybe there's like a board or something that Americans would vote. And then maybe there's certain big decisions that would come up to a vote. Mostly you're voting for representatives that would run the technology, and you're electing people that you trust, that are going to keep the system nonpartisan, objective, all that stuff. So that's the point of the shares, really, for decision making and ownership, true ownership from the citizens. So that's that side of it. So the funding side, right now it's just small dollar donations, trying to get $5, $10 from a lot of different people. But then as we gain more buy-in with the citizens, we're providing a lot of amazing services right now for candidates, and then eventually for media, and then also movements. So for example, right now, we built a platform where all candidates can be visible equally. We have the tagging system to differentiate each of them, so you could quickly do a snapshot of what makes them unique and what they stand for. And we're going to ongoingly funnel voters into this system so that more and more people see these candidates. So once it gets to a point where they're getting substantial citizens have visibility with them, we're connecting to them like the results of all these open-ended questions and the tagging data. So we're giving them data that helps them drive which direction they should go. It's not going to give you their name. It'll just say, like, in this district, this is what people care about. In this state, this is what people care about. So these are all services that as we scale up and have the right amount of numbers, we can charge them and still have a very modest fee that's not anything compared to like the big pollsters and all that stuff, but still provided an incredible service, giving them visibility with millions of people, even plugging them in as we build the next stage with independent media. Then we're going to help connect candidates to the media so they get independent media attention where they don't get the mainstream media attention. So there's a lot of services basically that we're going to provide. So we're never going to charge the citizens directly, but any of these larger services, there's going to be more and more like marketing services, social media engagement services that we'd be providing. So we could, as that builds out, we could give more and more, charge more to the candidates, to media, and to movements that we're basically getting them more support. So that's the main thing with the funding. And I mean, another way to look at it too is like what we're building is a easier, significantly cheaper, more efficient way to showcase every candidate. Like we could showcase every candidate nationwide, federal, state, and local level for a fraction of the cost that it costs today to run campaigns. You know, right now, like the last election was over $12 billion. Like what we're talking about is like a couple million at most, and like and digitally showcasing everyone in one fair stage. So it's a significantly cheaper way to showcase candidates. You know, so there's plenty of ways to you know do the modest you know charging for services that we're providing and all that, and just keeping it ethical and transparent.
That makes a lot of sense. I guess this leads me to, like, you know, you've been personally, you know, heading a lot of this up. How did you want to, you know, how did you come about wanting to get involved in this kind of information diffusion and, you know, changing democracy? What specific things inspired you to do that?
I guess that, well, like long story short, all my life, like I've always saw myself. I think very differently. I'm neurodivergent, like autistic technically. But I have this like pattern recognition thing, and like I see things in a way that most people don't, which has its pros and cons. But you know, originally it was always psychological and sociological interest of mine since I was like 12, and then it became more political in 2016 when I saw Trump versus Bernie. But ultimately, it's like I saw the patterns and then realized like what would be the common denominator if you changed one thing to have the largest impact on society to fix the system towards representation. And so with my brain of thinking, like, you know, seeing what money in politics is, seeing how how the system works today, how people want the system to work, all those things together over time, I saw this giant big picture and then figured out that what I'm building right now is the common denominator. The way to flip everything around by doing one big thing can flip everything around. And that's, you know, building an equal stage. If every citizen knows that every candidate and every citizen is in one place, you don't need millions of dollars. Every citizen can go here, see all their choices, all the intricacies of, you know, who's different from each other, compare them side by side, and then candidates get their visibility where they're getting shut out. I mean, it just fixes everything, and the only challenge is the buy-in to just get enough citizens on board, and then everything else can just follows immediately after that. So that's it. So it's basically like what would have the biggest impact with you know one rock and kills a million stones. That was the answer. And so I built basically what I saw as the best solution that would really flip the system over and bring a true democracy forward.
All right. So you have this in-game vision. You've been working on this for a while. What are some potential hang-ups you might face in getting this off the ground?
Well, the biggest thing, like, and this is all those tech companies that have tried some kind of political social network have failed, is there's this chicken or the egg thing where like the hub is still only as valuable, like for citizens, it's going to be more valuable once there's like thousands of candidates creating their profiles and setting up their tags. So, you know, so citizens are waiting for candidates to set up their tags. Meanwhile, candidates are more enticed to go on the platform if citizens were already there. So it's like citizens are waiting for candidates are waiting for citizens. So there's that chicken or the egg. So that's definitely the biggest challenge to overcome. I mean, that's also why we're focusing on outreach, is like we're selling the potential of what this could be. And then also that like a lot of the candidates we're talking to, if they funnel citizens to the hub, we could gather data that they need of like what do these people care about, what are their priorities, stuff like that. And then there's a networking effect that you as a candidate bring some people in, then this other candidate brings people in. You're both going to benefit from the visibility of each other's. So it's kind of like incentivizing the candidates to bring their own citizens with them onto the system. That's how we're trying to overcome it. But that is the big chicken or the egg issue that we have. And other than that, the biggest thing was just like there's so many layers to what we're doing. It took a while to like to streamline like what to keep in the forefront. So I've been working on this for about 3 years, and we finally felt like this was the year we were ready. This is where we launched the hub in January, added the political part, the political candidate discovery last month. So now we're finally really ready to move forward. But the first 3 years was about language. How do we say this that people really understand that we're nonpartisan, that we're neutral, we're the referee. We just want to build a level playing field. So there's like a lot of that. That was the initial challenge that we overcame. And so now it's just that chicken or the egg thing that we're working slowly past in Nevada.
Well, I think that that is a good penultimate question. I think my final question for you is like, what gives you hope that this will be successful, since it will undoubtedly have a lot of moneyed interest against it eventually?
Yeah. Well, it's really, yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's that, you know, people desperately want change. People know the system is breaking down. You know, again, more than ever in modern history, more people are identifying as independent rather than Democrat or Republican. Even the registration numbers are actually starting to reflect that people are leaving the two parties to be independent. People are ready for change. You know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the people might not have been ready enough. Now they're going to be more open to something different. They just see that the system is just not working, regardless of who's in office at the time. So I see that. I see all the polling data. It's like, it just, what we're building just makes so much ethical and logical sense. And no matter where you are on the spectrum, whether you're very traditional or you're Democrat or you're extreme on any side, like no matter where you stand, what we're building will benefit you. There's infrastructure to help you. So if you're a third party, we're building a shared infrastructure that completely plugs you in. If you're a Democrat, we have a way to get past the gatekeepers. You know, everyone has a way to use this to their own advantage. And you know, and people can see that. We've seen it in our samples as we talk to thousands of citizens and movements and stuff. Like, we do give people new hope. We've proven we have people in the movement from like socialists to anarchists and moderate Republicans, centrists. We have like every flavor of political person in on board with this. So we just need to scale it up at this stage. So that's what gives me hope, is just people want change. No one else really has like a real solution forward. We're the only ones like building something where we're not going to shove you in a decision. We're not saying this is how you need to vote on healthcare. This is who you need to vote for. No, we're building an infrastructure that helps you make your own decision. And, you know, so it's so different from anything else. It's very easy to differentiate ourselves in that sense. So it's all now a matter of scaling it. And that's what keeps me hope here. Keeps me hopeful right now.
All right. I'd like to thank you for your time. Where can people find your work, Travis, if they're interested in what Fink and the DP Hub are doing?
Yeah, so for everyone that this resonates with, just go to hub.futureis.org. The first thing we want you to do is just add your name. Once you're there, there's a few quick actions you can take, but that's the big first step. Add your name, answer a couple questions if you're willing to. They're optional. That adds the demand and support that we need to get this really to the next level.
All right. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.